With the help of Hashem, we are learning Megila Daf Tes Vav. We left off on Daf Yud Dalid Amid Beis. We are more or less in the middle of the Amid, 21 lines from the top of the Amid, Rabbi Yechanan Amad. Before we go on, we have a chat over here in which people are quoting a Zohar from Parshas Kiseitze that writes that Esther never actually went to Achashverosh, but she sent a shade, a demon that looked like her, to be with Achashverosh. Actually, the Maggid of Koznitz, we began yesterday shiur learning the Tosfos, says that the name of the shade is Much. That's the meaning of the Nigla, that she had relations with the Much. Now, L'cha'ura, the Zohar and B'chlal Kabbalah that focuses on the Pnimius is not addressing L'cha'ura if the body of Esther went to Achashverosh. Esther L'cha'ura went to Achashverosh. What the Zohar is pointing out, that it wasn't the same Esther, that her in the Pnimius of Esther, it wasn't her. She needed, so to say, to be possessed with a demon to be able to be with Achashverosh, L'cha'ura, and that's why even the Shita and the Zohar won't challenge the majority opinion that Daryavesh, the Persian, was the offspring of Achashverosh and Esther, not from a demon. And B'chlal, we have this in other areas. Also, Al Pi Kabbalah, where it says that, let's say, Adam was with that woman whose name you may not mention, with Lilith for 130 years. L'chayra, it also means that there was some sort of connection between Chava and her L'chayra, or at least in Adam's perception, and he wasn't really with the person. You can be with someone begashmius, but you are not with them beruchnius, because their ruchnius is embodied or connected to some other koyach. That's the way I understand these things on Pi Kabbalah. Now, first of all, we're going to conclude today the sugya of the 7 prophetesses, and that's mamish funny, but I know I'm not saying it correctly. But good, Daddy's not yet on the line. We're going to learn about Huldah, right? The 6th of the 7th is a descendant both of Yehoshua ben Nun, and Rachav, or Rachav Hazoina. We're going to have very interesting statements today. We're going to learn that Kol Makim, everywhere in Nach, Sheshmoi V'Shem Aviv, Benevius, where the Torah is recording a Navi, and it's recording so-and-so, ben so-and-so, like Saraya ben Machseya. B'chlal, you give the name of the father when you are speaking about someone who's otherwise unknown. These Nevi'im were very known. So there's no need to mention their father's name. Why do you mention them on the father's name? That's actually to tell you that not only is the son the Navi, like Saraya, as we'll learn, but the father that's connected to the child, to the son, is also a Navi. We're going to learn about Malachi. Who is Malachi? There's going to be different Ashitas. We're going to have the Gemara concluding that Malachi and Ezra is one and the same person. We're going to learn that the 3 days of fasting that Esther asked for Mordechay to decree, which he did, happened on the 14th, the 15th, and the 16th of Nisan, which means that year they did not eat matzah on Pesach. Asherloi kados. We're going to have a chazal that we also have in Brachas Daf Zayin, Aliyah birchas hedyet kala beinecha. We're going to have something similar, Aliyah kilalas hedyet kala beinecha, as we'll explain. We're going to have many statements from Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Chanina, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Kol ha'omer davar b'shem oynoi mevi geula la'olam. And other statements that we have from Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Chanina. We're going to have a total chevra of 12 reasons why did Esther invite Haman to that party. Once and then again. We're going to have 10 shitas in the Tanoim, and we're going to have another 2 shitas in the Amoraim. B'chlal, we're going to have a lot more Perushim and Drashas going through the Megila. And without any further ado, again, that Yud Dalid Amid Beis, we left off 21 lines from the top of the Amid. We are discussing the question that why is it that when Yoshio HaMelech had a question, he wanted to reach out to a Navi to interpret the meaning of the fact that the Sefer Torah that was opened up was not opened up to the beginning of Bereshis, as normally that Sefer Torah was rolled back to the beginning. But when they opened up the Sefer Torah, it was rolled up mamish towards the end, to the portion in Parshas Kisave that's speaking about the king and the Jewish people going into exile. Now, of course, we understand what that means, B'chlal. We're going into Golus. But the Yoshio HaMelech wanted to know more details about it. And at that time, the master Navi was Yirmiyahu. So the question is, why did Yoshiyahu HaMelech go to Huldah? So first of all, we explained the Gemara yesterday. There are two parts to the question. Aleph, how can the Talmud Navi respond? Al derech, you find that a Talmud may not paskin a halacha b'fnei rabbi. Something similar is by Nevi'im. So that we addressed, because since she was a Korev, she knew that Yirmiyahu would be happy with that. As we also find many Rabbanim, they want for the younger Rabbanim to paskin, they should feel more confident and to see if they know what they're saying. The question is, why did Yoshiyahu himself not go to Yirmiyahu? So the last answer we gave was phenomenal. Well, since Huldah is a woman, and Nashim Rahmani is saying there's an extra measure of Rahmanis. It's very important again, just to reiterate, it's not that Chas v'Shalom we are saying that when the Navi is challenging the word of God, it becomes colored according to the Navi. We don't say that at all. The words of a Navi is the words of God Almighty. However, like the commentators point out, like the Marsha and others say, it's because after the moment Huldah channeled the word of God, that there's going to be galus, she right away was mispalel to Hashem that it should be delayed, or b'chlal it shouldn't happen. That we find by Moshe Rabbeinu, he was constantly pushing back, and Yoshiyahu HaMelech felt that Yirmiyahu, who was prophesizing the bitterness of the galus, might not push back or ask for Rachmanas as much as Huldah would, and he was right, because Huldah asked for Rachmanas, and God granted us many more years. It was be'erach 35 years after this event that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and not immediately. Rabbi Yochanan continues, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, a practical answer. I love these practical answers. Why didn't Yoshiyahu go to Yirmiyahu? Because he was not there. Yirmiyahu lo yahava hasam. Yanachal daf yud dalid amid beis, ya middle of amid. Why wasn't Yirmiyahu there? This is important. Shahalach lahachzir achseres hashvatim. Yes, Sancheriv exiled the 10 shvatim. We know that. But enough of them returned. Now there's a big machlokas rishonim. How, when we say that Yovel is only Noyeg, do you have to have Kol Yoshveh Aleh? What does that mean? You have to have Kol Yoshveh Aleh. All the Yidden have to live in Eretz Yisrael. Does it mean not a single Jew is allowed to be out? That doesn't mean that. It definitely means that you have to have a substantial representation of each of the 12 tribes. So there was definitely a huge return of the 10 Shvatim. This doesn't mean to say that you still have some of those Yidden that, so to say, are lost. Okay. But when people when I was young, I always heard that lost 10 tribes. It's not correct. Yirmiyahu brought them back. And therefore the halachas of Yovel were back enacted. And that's why Yirmiyahu was not there. So the best, closest option was reaching out to Huldah. Now, how do we know the Ahadur? That means that he succeeded. No, we're not challenging. Yeah, Yirmiyahu attempted to bring people back. We know when Ezra attempted to bring the Yidden back into Eretz Yisrael during the beginning of Bayesheni, he did not succeed, nothing as much as he would have wanted. Because it says, let's begin. Yecheskel said a nevuah. Now this was a nevuah about the final 11 years, as we just learned a few days ago, that when Nebuchadnezzar dominated Eretz Yisrael in the second year of his reign, one of the first things he did when he entered Eretz Yisrael is that he exiled king, either Yechaniah or Yehoiachin. That's the same king. And the Beis HaMikdash still stood for 11 years. During those 11 years, says Yecheskel, that you can make sales. And normally Yidden were already accustomed back to the dinim of Yovel, that when you sell your real estate, it's really only a lease. You will return to it, but not now. But he told them, people won't go back to their ancestral home, even though now, obviously, if Yovel was not in effect, there was no novelty in that prophecy. Is the Charaya that no, there was Yovel was Noyeg, theoretically. They just never hit the year of Yovel. And guys, we're going to learn in Erchen, Daf Yud Beis, Daf Yud Gimel, all that real sugya about the numbers, about exactly in what year of the creation. It's a very important sugya with the different machloikis, and there's two big machloikis and bekitzer, whether Adam's coming into the world meant that year 2 began. I hope we mentioned this in Rosh Hashanah, because we're going to go with the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, even though the Gemara says we paskin like Rabbi Yeshua, that the world was created in Tishrei. We're celebrating Rosh Hashanah, but Rosh Hashanah is celebrating the creation of Adam. Adam was created on the 6th day of creation. No one debates that. But it's a new year. So do we cheshbon the prior 5 days as a different year? So Adam is in year number 2. we're learning this Bashgacha Pratis now in year 5782. How do you count that? So there's the question regarding the first year. Is it year 0, year 1, or year 1, year 2? The other big question is regarding the Mabul, being that there was a certain cessation of the movements of the Mazalos. To what degree? Let's learn at Kipshute that nothing moved in the heavens, so maybe that year didn't count. And all of that leads into the reason why there's a machlokes Rishonim. And what year was the Churban Bayis Sheni? Was it in year 68? We learned this in Erech, year 69. People say year 70. All of that is also connected to the cheshbonos that we're going to learn in Erech regarding Yovel. But the bottom line is that until the Churban Bayis Rishon, we were counting Yovel. Because after that Yovel was already bottled, and the Navi is giving a prophecy that you should know that Yovel will no longer be into effect, is the Chanaya that until the end of Bayis Rishon, Yovel was noig. Yovel only is in effect if all of the Yidden live in Eretz Yisrael, however you apply that. Minimally, that you have the roiv of every Shevet living in Eretz Yisrael, which means that there must have been a point where the 10 tribes, at least the Rubam returned. Which is another novelty because of the splitting of the kingdom of Yehuda and Yisrael, and the 10 Shvatim belong to Malchus Yisrael, and beautifully is that we're going way back. We're not going back to 11 years. Again, Yoshia's finding of the Sefer Torah. This whole story happened 35 years before Churban Bayis Rishon. It was from then that he hid the Aron HaKodesh, as we learned together in Shkolim. So that means that for those 35 years, there was one king. It's like almost like before a person passes away, they get more life. Like before the Churban Bayis Rishon, and from then the Shechina went into Golus, and it's only returning with Mashiach. There was something beautiful, which is there was one king over everyone. That Yoshio was a king on the, as it says, that this is a story that that we record, that Yoshio went to Beis El, and he was a tzaddik. So there was an altar that was built to serve idolatry. And you know what Yoshio did? Wow, he took the bones, Rashi says, of priests. They already died. And he burned their bones on the Mizbeach that they built for Avodah Zarah. And Vayomer, he asked, Yoshio asked to the Chevra there, Ma hatzin haloz, what's this marker? Asher ani roya. Vayomeru Elov. That Anshe Ha'ir, Hakever Ish Olekim Asher B'Mi Yehuda. This is the grave of a holy man that came from Yehuda. Vayikras Advarim Eil Asher Osis Lam Mizbeach Be'Iskel. They told Yoshio that the Tzion that people used to go to daven at was of a Navi that lived many years prior that prophesied that there's going to be a Jew that's coming from Yehuda. And that was now clearly about Yoshio. And he's going to do what you did. His action was foretold by a Navi that he's going to dig up the bones of these priests and he's going to burn them on their Mizbeach L'Avodah Zarah. Now, B'chlal, what is Yoshio doing in Beis El, which is a city in the territory of Yisrael, of the Aseres HaShvatim? If he only would have been king like the prior kings only on Yehuda, then the other kings didn't even go there. Is a raya that Yoshio already was the king over the whole territory of Eretz Yisrael. The Chimativa shel Yoshio al Mizbech bebeis Keil or bebeis El. Elamalamed Yoshio malach aleim. All right, and Rav Nachman Amar, a proof. Again, we're just proving that not only did Yirmiyahu attempt to bring back the 10 tribes, but he succeeded. And not only did he succeed, but they didn't have their king. But Melech Yehuda, then Yoshio was a Melech, as will be Mashiach over all the Eden, because it says in Hoshea, Gam Yehuda, you tribe Yehuda. This is referring to Melech Yoshio. Oh, that is a Melech from Yehuda. Shas Katzir Lach, that there is a harvest appointed for you. That's a lashon of there's greatness appointed for you. That means that what was the greatness? That will be a time. This is still Bisman Bayis Rishon that Yehuda will rule over everyone. But when would that happen? B'shuv Yishmus Ami, when the Yidden will return. And again, this is not referring to the coming of Mashiach, but this is an event that already happened when Yirmiyahu brought back the 10 tribes. So that concludes the sugya of Hulda. And now the 7th Neviah, Esther. How do we know Esther is a Neviah? It's amazing that on Daf Zayin, when we had that whole Gemara about whether Esther is part of the Nach or not, and we Gemara proved that Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh. That can also be rayas, because some of the proofs we had above is the fact that they made a statement, like Abigail made a statement. It doesn't say she was an Neviah. The fact that she foretold certain things and it happened is a right that she's an Neviah. And by the way, there are other Girsois in our Gemara. I want you to know. There are other gersois, which I forgot which reference, which quotes one of the things we had on Daf Zayin. But here, the Gedai that we have in our Gisa, Esther, Dechsiv, Vahiba Yoyim HaShlishi. And again, as we'll see today, even though the Gemara doesn't write it explicitly, but we know it was over the first day of Pesach. It was on the 16th day of Nisan. And on Luach Chabad, we have a minhag that on the second day of Pesach, during the day, we add something to the meal, Lezecher de Su'uda of Esther. That was the third day. It was on the third day, Vatilbash Esther Malchus. And Vatilbash Esther Malchus. So the Gemara's question is, it should have said she wore big day Malchus. This is Mamash Kabbalah. She wore the level of Malchus. She wore Nevuah. She wore godliness.
That's what that means, Pshat?
That's the Gemara's. Nothing here is Pshat learning Agadata. It should have said big day Malchus. Ella. You know what it means? Shalaf Sharuach HaKodesh. Where else do you find in scripture that when we are referring to divine inspiration on the level of Nevuah, you use the word bigadim, ksiv ha'chavatilbash, ksiv Hassan and divrei hayamim v'ruach lavsha es Amasai, and that pasuk is clearly speaking about how Amasai was engarbed in the spirit of Ruach HaKodesh Nevuah. Again, there are other rayas on Daf Zayin, and indeed there are other that have other gersois in our Gemara. Now that we are concluding the sugya of women that have the level of nevuah. So just okay, let's read it inside, and I have a little bit of a suggestion. Al pi Chasidus, Amar Rav Nachman, lo yaha yihirusa l'nashi, that chashivus, prominence, which could lead to arrogance, is not good for women. The haraya karte nashi, there were two women that Yehid and Havyan, that they became arrogant, dafka because they were given prominence. They were two of the seven, and uvisana'an shemayu, and we gave them a name that is hateful. They are called by a creature that's not kosher. What are the two names? Chada shema ziburta. Ziburta is the abi, the vaida. Notice the very fact, there was a certain amount of arrogance that came into her because of her chashivas, because of her nevius, and that's why her name was the abi. And the chada shema karkushta, another was called a weasel. Ziburta dechsiva. What was the arrogance that we found by the vaida? Vatishlach vatikra lebarak. And in that case, after all that Barak did to her, she should have gone to him. Her not going to him was a certain amount of, according to the level of her being such a great tzaddikus, she should have been more humble. Karkushta, weasel, right, chulda, as it says regarding her, regarding the story that Imru le'ish, or Amru le'ish, when she responded to the meaning of the Sefer Torah being opened, like the Igros over there in Kisavai, she didn't v'loi Amra Imru lamelech. She was responding to King Yoshio, and she called him a ish. Now, arrogance, my friends, are not good for anyone. Let's go Pi Chasidus. There's a mashpia and there's a makabel. So arrogance takes away the shechina, but the intrinsic midah of a woman is a makabel. And arrogance is the opposite of a makabel. That's the pshat in the Gemara.
She was one of the nevios.
Both of them, both the Voida and Chulda. In other words, loyoi, that's not good. Arrogance is not good to anyone, but it goes against the etzem mitzius of a woman more than for a man.
What about Esther?
Esther was not arrogant.
Yeah, but how does Chulda have arrogance and get nevios?
That's not a contradiction, because that's what I said. It's not speaking about arrogance that we are, the Garaba arrogance that for which we kick away God. Relative to their level, the little bit of the shminish of the shminis, that we have over there in Soita is unhealthy more for women than for men, because it goes against their etzem mitzios of being a makabel. You can't be a makabel. Makabel means I have to be open and empty. Okay. Another thing, that just to make it clear, that way that Rebbe Rashab, makabel doesn't mean to receive. That's a very bad translation. You're learning it or not now. Mekabel means the koyach to receive something, to develop it exponentially, and to give it forth. That's a mekabel. Everyone is a mashpia mekabel, but a man who gets will more or less give what he got. That's not called a mekabel. It's not. Don't think about a cup. The best example of a mekabel we have in Hasidus is either a woman, so she's mekabel the seed from a man, and look what she gives, something infinitely greater than what she got. Or the concept of putting a seed in the ground, that's just to know the meaning of a makabel. But that koyach to transform something, mamish, almost yesh meyayin, is dafke because of the bittul of malchus. That's why if there's a lack of bittul, then she loses her koyach, her uniqueness. Okay, weiter. Amar Rav Nachman, have 8 lines from the bottom. These are dafim from Masechta Barachas. We need a siyata d'shmaya to have kfitzas haderech. Amar Rav Nachman, Chulda, you know who she's from? Mi b'nei banav shel Yeshua hoisa. She's a descendant of Yeshua ben Nun. How do I know that? Look at these rayas. Just to make it clear that I so don't understand these rayas. We're so far from the light. Just to read that they do the mitzvah. It says by Chulda ben Charchas. It says by Yeshua some event happened b'timnas cheres, hers cheres. Is a raya that they're connected. Good. If you're happy with that, then you need to Rachman Osanos. By Esvei Rav Enosava to Rav Nachman says in a Braisa, Shmoyne Neviim, there were 8 Neviim, which also happened to be Kohanim. All of them are descendants from Rachav HaZoina. I want you to know the pshat of HaZoina. I know Zoina normally means a Zoina, but you have Rashi writes over there in Nach. Zoina means that she was mason. She fed people. Also, innkeepers sometimes are called Zoinas. Not in a derogatory way. So whichever one it was, just to know that they came all from Rachav HaZoina, who we know converted with the kasha that all the Rishonim asked. She was from the 7 nations. Bottom line is, she was Megayer, and she was Zoicha ultimately to have these 8. Now these 8, it's amazing. 4 of them are sons, then their fathers. These are 4 groups of father who was a Navi, that was Zoicha to have a son that was a Navi. And who are the 8? Let's go. Neriah, number 2, Baruch, number 3, Seraya, number 4, Machseya, number 5, Yirmiyah, amazing, number 6, Chilkiah, number 7, Chanamel, and number 8, Shalom. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, there was another descendant from Rachav HaZoina, Afchot HaNabiyah, is Mibnei Boneh Shol Rachav HaZoina Hoysam. And he has also a raya. What's his raya? It says over here meaning by Chulda. Right, the 3 lines from the bottom. Ben Tikva. She's referred to Ben Tikva, the child of hope. And it says regarding Yeshua, it says regarding Rachav HaZoina, as Tikvas Chut Hashani. We are familiar more with this, even people that went to yeshiva, which means that normally they did not learn yet Nach properly, at least for someone like myself. But we have this in Haftorah. So, right, so she put out the red scarlet, Araya. So what's the problem? The problem is Chulda a descendant of Yeshua or from Rachav? So the Gemara says, what's the problem? V'amar lei, that Eino Sava, right, Rav Eino, or he called him, and this is a compliment, Pasya Ukma, guys, we just had this in Tainas Dav Zayin. Remember that the daughter of the Roman emperor referred to Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah, you ugly person, you black vessel. And we learned that whole sugya over there because fakir, that was Lamal Yusa. People that are into learning, they're not into their looks, and that the whole people get arrogant when they look handsome, and the Gemara quoted other people, and if they would have been less attractive, they would have been even greater. Just to know this is a beautiful lashon. That you dark vessel, you know, the Al Pi Kabbalah, there's light. And then there is the light of darkness, the candle of darkness, right? The butzina the kardinusa. We learn in Chassidus about it's the highest madrega. But anyway, that you this time Shemaitza. What's your problem? You're quoting that Chulda is a descendant from who? You have Yeshua, you have Rachav. I'll give you the answer. Yeshua married Rachav, Amachaya. The Igaira, she converted. The Nazva Yeshua, and Yeshua married her. And here we have the Toisvis. I'm not going to read it. Watch it. It's already 6:25. How can Yeshua marry someone that belongs to the Shivas Amamin? Okay. Yeshua had any male descendants? It says in Divrei Hayamim regarding the Yichus. We're going down. So Nun Benoi. Then it says Yeshua Benoi, and that's the end of the line. Which means that Yeshua, after Yeshua, there were no more sons. So the Gemara says again, what's the question? What's the answer, David? He had daughters. So he's a descendant from the daughters. So he was Suvaitid, Gamis. Banei lo Havale. The Yeshua had no sons, but Benos and Havale, all the great people have daughters. Here we go. The Frida had 3 daughters. Okay. Says the Gemara. Daf Tezvav.
So far.
So far. I like the word so far. Bishloima. He's not speaking about the Frida Kedeva, he's speaking about someone closer to him. Bishloima Inu. Now, so we just quoted that there were the 8 prophets. So Rashi tells you which one are we referring to. So Inu, meaning Yirmiyah, Hanamel, Rashi says Baruch and Soroya. The Torah writes, you have to know Nach, the way Rashi knows Nach. On each one of these four just mentioned, the Torah writes in Nach, they were Nevi'im. They called them Nevi'im. But Ella, Avhasayu, but their fathers is Chilkiah, Shalom, Neriah, and Machseah, says Rashi. The latter four, Minolan, how do you know that they were prophets? When we just had the whole daf yesterday proving, how do we know that they're prophets? Here we have a very simple answer. Kedula. That Ula made a statement. Kol Mokim Sheshmoy V'Shem Ava B'Nevius. Whenever Nach is recording a Navi, and it doesn't only write the name of the prophet, but it says the prophet, Ben the father, like you mentioned in the intro. Why do you write Ben? To identify someone who's already known doesn't need to be identified. It's a meaning B'Yodua Shehu Navi Ben Navi. And the same thing is in the reverse, that whenever Shemai V'Lo Shem Aviv, whenever the Torah, meaning Nach, records the name of a Navi, Nach, not the Chumash speaks about Moshe. Moshe was Ben Amram. Amram was the greatest people that ever lived, right? One of the four people that only passed away from the bite of the snake. But in Nach, whenever you have a name of a Navi mentioned without the name of the father, be you do it that only the son is a Navi and the father is not a Navi. Another interesting rule, Shmoi v'Shem Iroi, when you mention the name of a Navi and you quote where he comes from, be you do that means that he comes from that city. Obviously, the chiddush is if the Torah speaks about a Navi and nowhere in Nach does it say where that Navi came from. Shmoi v'Lo Shem Iroi, you Yerushalmis will love this. Be you do that he comes from Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is the city that produces Naviim. The Masnisa Tana we learned in the Braisa. Kol Shemaisa v'Maisa voice of Sisumin. Anyone, right, who the Torah never discloses anything about them. We're speaking about Nach. But there's one thing that's disclosed about a Navi, and that's something positive. That means, for example, when we're speaking about Zephaniah, so it says, going Devar Hashem Asher Hayel Zephaniah Ben Kushi Ben Gedalia. Same concept. In other words, the Torah never speaks anything about Kushi, never speaks about that Gedalia, even about Zephaniah. All the Torah speaks about Gedalia is that God came to him. That's a big compliment. You know what it means? Not only did God come to Zephaniah, but God came to Kushi, not at the same time. It means the godless that is ascribed to one, if that one is Ben, and even the Zayda, all of that goes to all of them. B'yadua shehu tzadik ben tzadik. There's something written derogatorily in the context of this person, then that person. For example, it wasn't the 7th month. By Yishmael, this is the Yishmael Chevra that murdered tragically Gedalia ben Achikam. But when the Torah is speaking about that Genai, we're giving him a yichus. Came Yishmael, ben Nesanya, ben Elishama. You know what that means? It means that Nesanya and Elishama were also Rashai. That's the call. B'yadua shehu Rasha ben Rasha. Omar Rav Nachman, that you should know that Malachi is actually Mordechay. Wow. Why is he called sometimes Malachi? Because Shehoya Mishnah Lamelech. Guys, remember this concept. Malachi, a Melech, because he was a Mishnah Lamelech, Achashverosh. Now, Meisvei, on the Amoira, it says in a Braisa that Baruch ben Neriah and Soroya ben Machaseya, we just had these Nevi'im, and Doniel, and Mordechay, and Bilshan, and Chagi Zechariah Malachi. Before we go on, here you see the kasha. Mordechai is mentioned, and Malachi is mentioned. It's not the same person. But Vashtek in the Braisa, Kulam Nesnamu, they all had a prophecy, Bishnashteim, in the 2nd year of the kingdom of Daryavish. So clearly, they're not the same person. They're mentioned each one individually, and indeed, to Yufta, Rav Nachman is refuted. He didn't know the Braisa. Now that we know the Braisa, he retracts. But now that we introduced the concept that it could be Malachi was not a person called Malachi, we're going to quote many different approaches. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, Malachi is actually Ezra. The Chachamim say, no, Malachi is Malachi. Malachi is his name. Amar Rav Nachman, Mistabra, Commander Amar Malachi is Ezra. Why? Because it says regarding Megillas Malachi, Bog the Yehuda, Malachi was the one that spoke out against assimilation. And we know historically that in the relatively short 70 years of the first Galus, there was a tremendous amount of assimilation. We know from Asar Yuchsin and Kedushin that Ezra's main mission was to make sure that they separate themselves from their wives. And the same thing is found by Malachi. That's why it's the same person. They have two people doing good things. No, they're doing the same one. It says, Bog the Yehuda, that Yehuda acted, with a bigud against God. Something abominable happened. Ki chilal Yehuda kodesh Hashem, that Yehuda was machalal that which is holy. You know what's holy? The Jew is holy. We're not allowed to intermarry. Asher ohev ubal bas el nechot. Notes, we see that Malachi was fighting against intermarriage, and we know from elsewhere, Uman Afrish Nashim Nachriyos, who had the greatest effect to get the men who already married out to separate themselves from the non-Jewish wives. Ezra, as it says, Vayan Shachnaya ben Yechim ben Elam, Vayemer LaEzra, Anachnu Ma'alnu Belikim. Amoida to you. Vanoishiv Nashim Nachriyos, and we took women that are not Jewish. You know, when a person, when Shachniah told that to Ezra, that was the first step of tshuva, and he let those families. Huh?
Same Ezra as the Zera?
The same Ezra of Ezra, our Ezra. There's only one Ezra. Oh, so now I just want to say perhaps that we mentioned before that Malachi is Mishnah Lamelech. Maybe if we're saying over here that Ezra is Malachi. Ezra, we spoke about the greatness of Ezra, that he was the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, and he made the Siddur, and he made the Minyan, and he closed the Tanach. Maybe he's like Mishnah Lamelech Moshe. Maybe it's like from the greatest Jew after Moshe Rabbeinu. Mishnah Lamelech. Okay, right. Tana Rabbanan. Let's go weiter. Chevra Agadet. Everything obviously has a message. What the message is, may God enlighten all of us. Arba Noshim Yefeifiyos Hoye Ba'olam. There are 4 women that were exceptionally beautiful. And who are the 4 women? Sarah, and we're going to go with the emendation of the Mesilas Hashas that orders it chronologically. Sarah, Rochav, Avigail, and Esther. Asks the top Tosfos, whoa, did we not, when we just quoted it yesterday in Baba Basra, the Gemara says that all women in front of Sarah is like kekuf b'nei Adam, is like a monkey compared to a person. That's how superior Sarah's beauty was. And then Sarah in front of Chava was also kekuf b'nei Adam. That means Chava was the most beautiful woman that ever lived. So why does Chazal mention Chava answers Tosfos? We're only speaking about women that were born from other women. Chava doesn't count. She was created by God's hands. Okay, so these are the 4. So Nachamal, Sarah, Rachav, Avigail, and Esther. Laman, the Amr, did we just learn Chedar and Daf Yud Gimel, all opinions. Sarah, Esther, Noises, Chaim. What does that mean? We had one opinion that says that actually she's called Hadassah because Esther Yirak Roikes, that she had this greenish complexion. Greenish complexion, al pi pshat, is not a compliment. So there was a lack, something. And Oy Bazoi, Taka, you're right. Take out Esther and Uma'ayel Vashti. Now here we understand the point here is that if Vashti was from the most beautiful woman that ever lived, it just emphasizes the nays that Achashverosh killed Vashti and he married Esther. Both miracles. Speaking about the beauty of these 4, Rachav was so beautiful that if you only hear her name being mentioned, you already are filled with a passion, with a lust to be Mezana. We had this. Where did we have this, Chevra? We had this in Tainus. So Rachav b'shmazinsa. Yoel, right? Yoel, the story that she seduced Sisera. And the Chazal say she had 7 or 8 relations, I forgot, with him. That's how she got him to get tired. So, and how did she get him in? She called him into her tent. So her voice was that attractive. Avigail arouses desire by remembering Avigail that we learned about yesterday. And the final one, Michal Bas Shaul, when you looked at her, then you were filled with a desire. Each one is greater than the other, right? One is just hearing her name, one you have to hear her voice, one you have to remember her, and one you have to actually see. That Rachav was so beautiful that if you just say her name, Gavalt, Miyad Nikri, you have a seminal emission. Amar Rav Nachman, one that's not true. I said that many times. Didn't do anything to me. So Amar, so we responded to him. Of course, you never knew her. You don't know what she looks like. Kiko Amino. This concept is only biyoidu ubemakira. There's a lot here. At least we should acknowledge. I have no idea what I'm learning, but we're learning the Torah. I'm just happy to read these words and to hopefully teach them correctly. But there must be a lot of the secrets of the Torah that are here.
It's just really quick. It's something interesting that just 2 of these women are not mentioned in the Arba Nashim Yefeifiyos.
That's number 1 good point. Another point, David HaMelech married 2 of them, but you're making a good point. And I think that's why Yol only B'Koila. Yol B'Koila.
It's not about her.
Because it wasn't about look, and same thing Abigail this chirasa. That's a good point. Thank you, Shuki. Okay, so now
What was his point?
this point is that we just quoted there 4 women, Yoel and Abigail are not mentioned in the 4, which is like why they imbued a person with lust, not by looking at them. One was the voice, and one was remembering her. Okay, right. We're back to interpreting the Megillah. Mordechay, you're right. Mordechay Yoda Eis Kol Asher Nasa. And now the Gemara is focusing on the Hemshech HaPasuk. The Pasuk writes, etc., that Vayetzi El Toicha Ir, right? Vayizad Zo'aka Gedoylo Umar. That's the quote. What did he shout out? So when you leave it, the pshat is, when you shout, you say ah or oi. That's it. You're not verbalizing it. No, the Gemara understands that there was something that he said. So my Omar. What was the Za'aka? So Rav Omar, he said, Gava Haman ma'achashverosh. Haman is more arrogant than Achashverosh. Because as we learned yesterday, Achashverosh hated the Jewish people. But his fear of getting reprimanded by God, there was something that inhibited him to do what he attempted now to do. That like, oh my God, there's someone that's even a bigger anti-Semite than Achashverosh. Shmuel Amar, that he made a statement, and I was reading this, B'loshain Sagi Nohar, as a euphemism. We're going to actually read the opposite of what Mordechay said, that Govar Malka Ilo B'Malkatatom, that the heavenly kingdom overcame the earthly kingdom. The earthly kingdom was Haman and Achashverosh, and what really happened was the opposite. And the earthly kingdom was going against God, and it looked like they're succeeding just by making a gezerah to kill the Jewish people. Then when it says "Vateschalchal hamalka," now chayil means fear. The pshat is that she was overcome with fear. Actually, the drasha will be that Vateschalchal is miloshen chalulim, that something happened to her cavities. My Vateschalchal amarav shepir sanida, that the news of what's happening touched her so deeply that it shook up her innards. Either for her becoming an Ida, Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar that she needed to go to the bathroom, and I think the Pnei Shoy here says, okay, so what's the pshat? He tries to understand what the Gemara is trying to say. Is that normally when a woman is getting her period, or when she has every person when they have bowels are not feeling well, they don't look good. And Esther yet looked beautiful during out this whole story. Right? Atikra Esther lahasach. The Hasach was sent to Mordechay to find out what's going on. Who's the Hasach? Amarav Hasach is Daniel. Now we know that Daniel was the big advisor for the Melech Bavel. We don't know what happened to Daniel. Why is it called Hasach? Because Daniel was demoted but not kicked out. Let me see. He had some sort of position over there in the royal palace. He was at service to Esther, but he wasn't no longer as he was with Nebuchadnezzar. Shmuel Amar, that Daniel remained in the high position. Shekoil divrei malchus. All of the royal affairs, nechtachim, right, alpiv, was decided by him. Hasach, hey and ches. Every Yiddish person from Russia will tell you that the hey and the ches is the same thing. Hello, how are you? So that's hasach, chatach, that's it. But das, malzeva al mazeh. So what does it mean that she wanted to know mazeva al mazeh? Now, the pshat is, Esther didn't yet know about the decree, and she wanted to know why is Mordechay mourning. But the mazeh al mazeh has a drasha, that Omar Rabbi Yitzchak, that Shon Chuloim, she asked him, she already knew that there's a gezerah. She wanted to understand how did it come to be that Shema over Yisrael al chamishi chumshei Torah. The chsiv bohem regarding the chamishi chumshei Torah, it says mizeh umizeh hein kesuvim. Now, how great is that? The problem is that mizeh umizeh kesuvim is written regarding what? It's written regarding the Aseres Hadibros. So Esther could have said Shema over Yisrael al Aseres Hadibros. So the lochayra, as we learn in Chassidus the whole time, is that the whole Torah is nirmaz in the Aseres Hadibros. But what's the meaning of that? That the level of godliness in Aseres Hadibros was more begoli than in any other part of the Torah. And part of our goal when we learn Torah is to at least yearn for the godliness in the Torah. Which is the Churban Bayis Rishon, as Chassidus explains. In other words, that maybe because the Yidden, when they were learning the Chamishei Chumshei Torah, they didn't link it to the Aseres Hadibros and to God. They were learning it because it's Geshmak. They were learning it because it makes sense. That's not why a Yid learns Torah. We want to get close to Hashem. It's good to enjoy it. It's a mitzvah of ahadavna, but the ikid of Torah is to get close to God, and maybe that is lacking. That we're skipping a few psukim. So basically, the first thing Esther told Mordechay, I am not up to going to the king. That was her first. She refused at first. Now, why didn't Tasach give the message? It says that Vayagidu is Lashon Abed. If Mordechay sent Esther with the message, then the same messenger should have responded. Mikan, this is such an important rule in life, my friends. She'ein meshivin al hakalkala. Don't report bad news. It's a very good rule in life. It was bad news. Esther was saying initially, I'm not going. Don't report it. You know the story in Ashkafta the Rebbe in Ksubas. No one, the whole story, no one wanted to notify that the Rebbe passed away. You don't have to be the bearer of bad news. Why? People have Amad, they notify. Never notify bad news. Let people find out from others. Now, so other people notified. Ultimately, Esther acquiesced, right? If Mordechay had very strong words to Esther, and she made 2 requests. She asked Mordechay to gather people. Request number 2 is to fast the 3-day fast. So Esther told Mordechay, and then she writes, Asheloi Kados. Asheloi Kados means that there was something that was going to happen. Das, right? The dasim, something that's going to happen that's not halachically correct. So Amar Rebbe, Amar Abba, I'm sorry, Shaloi Kados Oiso. Esther was about to do something which is halachically not correct. As we learned, Esther was with Achashverosh. The reason why she was allowed to go back to Mordechay, because since she was not the wife of a Kohen, the act of cohabitation was viewed in the context of an oinus. That Achshav, ad Achshav ba'oinus. But when she went to plead with Achashverosh, she was then for the first time willing to be with him biratzon. And you know what happens? If a married woman has a relation willingly with another man, then she can no longer be with her husband. And that's the meaning, which means she told him, as we learned, she was orphaned as an infant, mamish. She never met her parents. Now I'm going to be lost from you. Now I know it's late, but we have to speak out the following. Really, let me tell you a story. There was a shiur that was asked in the Noid B'Yehuda. There was a group of Yidden that were kidnapped, and the kidnappers were planning to kill all the Yidden. And there was a woman there that knew that if she's going to seduce the head and she's going to have an affair with him, then he's not going to kill them. And v'kacha. And then the question was, when they were finally freed, because of her, they wanted to know whether she's allowed to be with her husband. So you can term it as chilasi ba'oinois v'seifa b'ratzin or v'seifa b'pshia. In other words, here the Gemara says that Esther was claiming that since I'm going to be with Achashverosh to sell all the Yidden, I will no longer be allowed to have a relation with Mordechay, because if she'll have an act of cohabitation, which she had, it's called willingly. Is it called willingly? Yeah, she went willingly, but she did it because of the circumstances. There's a big machlokes on Periscope. The Noid B'Yehuda is the most machmer one, and he actually says that the reason why Esther was a b'chlal allowed to do it, someone quoted it in our chat, was until now she was never with Achashverosh willingly. And we quoted the Tosfos Karka Olam, right, Baruch, and she was not mechuyev to give her life, and therefore L'Ramam she was not allowed to give her life. But now that she's going to be with him willingly, the Noid B'Yehuda says that woman is not allowed to go back to be with her husband, tragically. Esther, so why was she even allowed to do it? So the Noid B'Yehuda is machalek between Hatzalas, Kol B'nai Yisrael, versus that story, even though this woman, because of her, 30 Yidden lived, but it's not all the Jewish people. Now, he's the most machmer. Many contemporaries argued with the Noid B'Yehuda. There's min akotza el akotza. The only challenge is many paskin that it's not even considered an act of ratzon. Like you can argue, you can frame it. She wasn't with him willingly. She needed to do it in order for her plan to come to fruition. We just quoted Yoel. Now the Gemara Taka says Yoel did an Aveda l'shem shamayim. So that's the big question. Is it called an Aveda l'shem shamayim? Like you can interpret that in all different ways, and all these opinions are brought down in halacha. Now we are really Vayaver Mordechay passed. What did he pass? Amarav. Number one, Shehever Yoim Rishon Shal Pesach B'Tainis, that when he carried through the ask of Esther and he decreed a 3-day fast, you have to push it the Megila, because the decree came about on the 13th of Nisan. And right away, Omer V'Oisa, you don't wait. You state Maher Ohuv, that when you love God, you do things quickly. So Mordechay right away made a 3-day fast. So the 3 days fast was the 14th to 15th of Nisan. You know what that means? That Vayavar Mordechay, it was a one-time thing. It was if not a one-time thing, we can't do it. No one kept the mitzvah of eating matzah. Shmuel Amar, no, it means Vayavar Mordechay. The first thing that she asked was Lech Kanois, to gather that God brought about what the Breslovers call it, minias. In other words, that when you do a mitzvah, there's going to be minias v'ikuvim. Actually, if there's no minias and ikuvim, sometimes it means you're not doing such a big mitzvah. So there was challenges that the Avar Arkuma Damai, that Mordechai, he made a gathering place. It rained and there was a big body of water that he needed to overgo or to go through. We have this by the Akeda and the Midrashim. So he needed to go through challenges even to get to the gathering of people. Vahi was on the 3rd day. Matilde Esther Malchus, here we just had this today because we started behind. She garbed herself with Malchus. So here, big day Malchus mi boyele. So Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, and now we're starting a series of statements from Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Melamid Shelamashta Ruach HaKodesh, that she didn't only garb herself with garments. Of course she did that. She also now was imbued with the spirit of Ruach HaKodesh. How do I know that? It says over here, Matilbash, and it says over there, Ruach Lavsha Es HaMosai. Now, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, La'olam Altihi Birchas Hedyot Kalbei Necha. Never should the blessing of what you think to be a Hedyot be something that you take lightly. When we learned the Gemara in Brachas Dav Zayin, Yishmol B'ni Borcheni, we quoted the Ragachover that has a Gavaldike insight. This is a statement not only on the recipient of the bracha. Don't say, that person blessed me, Stama Hedyot. It means you, me, we're the Hedyot. So many times we don't want to give a bracha. We say, why should I give a bracha? Who am I to give a bracha? La'olam Altihi Birchas Hedyot Kala Beinecha, give brachas. Bistayid, you're a descendant of Avram. You have a koyach, not yours. God gave you a koyach. Sharei Shnei Gdolei Ador, who were Birchom Shnei Adyotos, and you know what? V'niskaimu behem. And who are the two people? Oh, Shmuli, the Elohim, David and Daniel. David, who gave a bracha to David? The Borchei Aravna, as it says, Aravna Lamelech. It was a Magefa, and Aravna the Goy gave David a bracha, and it came to the Magefa stopped. Daniel. That Yavesh, again, we are saying that Yavesh was Taka, the son of the mother was Jewish, but then the halacha was different. He was not a Yid, but he gave a bracha to Daniel. And he tells him, Elikoch, the An Palach Lei, Betadira, the God to whom you are constantly praying to. Remember that? We learned about davening. I think that was in brachas that you daven towards Yerushalayim. We learned that from Daniel because he had the window open in when he worked for Nebuchadnezzar to daven towards Yerushalayim, who Yeshizvinach, that God should protect you, should save you, and that's why Daniel was saved from the lions. Same thing is in the reverse. If a hedyot gives someone a klala, they shouldn't say, it's garnished. Don't minimize the negative power of a klala from anyone. Sharei Avi Melach. Here you see the hedyot, we're speaking Baruchnias. Now we're saying something out of the pshat. In Bayera, when Avimelech gifted Avram Avinu with a lot of wealth, so Hinehu Lachak Sus Leinaim. Sus Leinaim means I'm making a cover up. Don't be angry with me that I took your wife. This will be a Sus Leinaim. The drasha here is that Avimelech was not happy by the fact that he needed to give such a big gift to Avram because he was never notified that Sarah is his wife. So he gave a curse, and he says that your eye should be covered up, which means you should become blind. Now, even though the klala did not happen, not to Avram nor to Sarah, but it happened to Yitzchak, even as Chaim Bezara, as it says, "Vayiki zokan Yitzchak vatechena enov ve'amar Allah zan b'chanina." Boy, Rei, come and say, "Shloi k'midas Hakadosh Baruch Hu midas basar v'dam." Midas basar v'dam. Adam shoy face kedera. Person first places the pot. First, you need to have a keli. Then you put the oil. Vessel comes before light. However, because if you don't have the pot and you're going to put the water, my friends, exactly where will the water stand? God first gives you the light. And then he puts the vessel. In other words, that the way God brings about rain, we're going back to Tainus. Now Tainus daf test. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua. Where does the rain come from? So the shita was that the rain comes from the upper heavens, whatever that means, from the other side of the Rakia. And first there's water that's suspended by God, and then God brings the clouds, that is the vessel. Bekitzer, I know it's late, but the way Hasidus explains the uniqueness of Shem Havaya over all the other Shemos is that this concept, just the Oisius and Hasidus, there's Oir and Kalim, and they come from two different sources. And then the Oir is put into the Kalim. When it comes to Shem Havaya, the Kalim of Havaya come from the Oir of Havaya. There's a certain unity of both koichas of the godliness in Shem Havaya more than all the other Shemas. Because in Yud Kei Vav Kei first comes the light, and then the light itself becomes the vessel that holds those lights. That's exactly in Nigla, that's the Gemara over here, and let's go weiter. As it says, and that brought about the Geula, because Achashverosh's desire to reward Mordechay is what set in motion all of the events that ultimately led to the downfall of Haman. Tzaddik avad only l'doirei of it. When a tzaddik is lost, so there's the physical and then there's the spiritual. Spiritual is never lost. So the people that were the closest physically to the tzaddik, they feel the loss the most. If you lose a pearl, exactly, is the pearl lost? No, the pearl is not lost. The pearl is wherever it is. The owner of the pearl is no longer with the pearl. Margolius kol makim shehi Margolius shema lo yavda ela lebailon. Now Haman said, "V'chol zeh einenu shoyveli." No, it's all that I have is worth nothing. What's the zeh? And Amar Rabbi Elazar Amar B'chanina that b'shah shiro Haman es Mordechay yosh b'shara melech. Amar, that is where Haman said, "Kol zeh." Now, but guys, whoever was by Shuki Siyum, zeh is marabetz boy v'omer zeh. There was something that Haman was alluding to. We'll get to that in a moment. But he was saying, "Kol zeh ein sheveli." What is that referring to? Kedar Rab Chizda, we quoted this a few days ago. The Amar Rab Chizda that zeh bo beperuz buli. Right, Prusbul, that Zuli, Buti, Zuli, we have the Gemara in Gittin. So Mordechay came with a document that wrote how wealthy Mordechay was, as we'll explain in a moment. The Zeba, that goes to Haman, at least we turn to Daf Tezvav Amid Beis. Beperos Buti, he came with another document that showed how impoverished Haman is. So there were two documents. And one showed how Haman has nothing. What does that refer to? Now we're going to have a word in a line in the Gemara, but before we read that, to have at least a little bit more, I'm going into the Marsha Chedushi Agados, and here we quoted there's a Midrash B'Yalkut, says the Marsha, that at some prior time, Haman was famished. A repetition of the story of Esav and Yaakov. And Mordechay gave Haman bread because Haman wrote a document, Zeh, in which he wrote that I'm your slave. And v'chol masher kana evet kana rabbi. So the greater and the more wealth Haman amassed, halachically, legally, it belonged to Mordechay, and that played itself out ultimately when Mordechay took over Beis Haman. So hayol avdoi, I'm reading the Marsha betulma de lachma, where some of these words we'll have in the Gemara, as it says in the Yalkut. So Haman was getting more and more wealth. Every time Mordechay saw him, not only did he not bow down to him, Mordechay reminded him, "Good job. The more you amassed, the better, the wealthier I am." Amarav Papa. Not only that, but for Karolei, Mordechay called him Avda, a slave, the Mizdaben Betalme, that sold himself just to get a few loaves of bread. Mordechay mocked him. Now, this only explained half, because the Zeh of Mordechay was the document. And again, I remember as in Cheder somewhere that it was written on the bottom of the sole of Mordechay, some sort of certain cultures showing other people the bottom of your shoe is like a big disrespect. That's what Mordechay did to Haman. That's where he put the document. But what about the other side? So the Gemara says, Melamed, it's not that Haman maybe had a document in his pocket with everything he possessed. When a person is into Gashmias, it was as if he always had all his things with him. That all of the physical treasures of that wicked Haman, they were engraved in his heart. And it was almost as if it was in front of him the whole time. So imagine you walk around, I have that much money, I have stocks and I have bonds, and you have your bank account in your pocket and you check it twice a day, and wow. And then every time Mordechay saw them, he said, good, whatever you own belongs to me. That means that which is chakuk, believing, is worth nothing because he knew the emes that it's taka worth nothing because it belongs to Mordechay Tzaddik.
And he says he's pointing at his own heart.
Yeah. That also HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Liois, Atorah, B'roish Kol Tzaddik V'Tzaddik. That God Almighty in the future, we're going to merit the level that we call Kesed. We will become a crown. Godliness will become a crown on the head of every tzaddik. As it says, Pasuk in Yeshaya Bayom, who on that day, will be La'ateres Tzvi, a crown of beauty. What does it mean? We're going through the whole verse in the Gemara. It says, La'ateres Tzvi, Uletzvi Nastifara, a crown of beauty, and a diadem. A diadem is a certain jeweled crown, right, of Tifara, beauty and glory. Says the Gemara, you know who will merit that type of level of godliness? Only two things. People, number one, who do God's will. That means people that are diligent in the observance of all the mitzvahs. And number two, and that fits with the words ateres tzfiras tifara. Mitzapin tifarta means people that are urgently waiting for the coming of Mashiach. That machakim b'chol yom itself will connect us to this high level. Now, yachol hakoil. No, Talmud Leimer, that's not enough. There needs to be more things. Talmud Leimer l'sha'ar amid, only to the remnants, which means aside of what we learned above, as we began today's shiur late, the milah of humility, that only when you have humbleness can you be merit to be a keli to the higher levels of kedusha. Lemisha meisam atzmei kishirayim. A person has to be very humble. Then it says vayter uleruach mishpat, to a spirit of judgment that refers to have done as yitzay, people who judge their yetzer. People who are oisik and avoida of his skafia. Lo yoishev ala mishpat zehadon denemes la'amitoy. Now, there's so much to say. Midas hagvura. You can argue that emes is the midah of tiferes. These are different levels of ruchnis dekavoida, only through which can you be merit these higher levels of kesed. Ulagvura means amas gaber al yitzroi. It's not a repetition. Why is everyone another level? So let us be enlightened. Let's read the words. Meshive milchama, right? Those who turn back in battle. What does it mean? Not people that run away from the battle. The opposite. People that the learning is so important for them. It's a war. Sha'ara, the gatekeepers, those refer to people not only while they're learning, they're into it and they're discussing, and it's a battle in a positive way. Gatekeepers means that quantitatively they're in the Beis Medrash a lot. The gatekeepers is that guy that opens up the doors in the Beis Medrash. He closes the door at night. And they open and they close the doors. The point is that there's going to be a pushback between Midas Hadin and HaKadosh Baruch Hu regarding how great of a reward will go to the tzaddikim, which is the amich kulam tzaddikim la'asad lavai, and that we're learning about it over here. That Amra Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the first Elam Elu is why are the non-Jews not even shaykh to this bracha? Why not? So Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael asku b'Torah, Umas Elam li asku b'Torah. More of that in Avodah Zarah in the beginning. Amarle, so the Midas Hadin is going to tell God, well, Gam Eila, even amongst the Yidden that were oisik b'Torah, at times, sometimes biyayin shogul ubashecher to'u poku pelilia, that there were times that they reeled through wine, they staggered through a strong drink. What does that mean? So, and poku pelilia means ein poku ala gehenim. The word poku means stumble, the pshat. But it means that even a yid that's oisik b'Torah, what did we learn? That lo yizochol nas lo samamavos. Sometimes you can stumble into Gehenna. As it says, that's actually what Abigail told David. Don't have a relation with me now, because if you'll do that, you'll stumble into Gehenna. So all of this just means to say, let's go back, connecting it to what we began learning, that a yid can be oisik b'Torah. That's what Esther thought, that maybe they mizeu mizen ksuvim. There's a certain amount of humility and bittul, and connecting godliness to the Torah that opens us up to these higher madregas. Let's go back there. Tamid, b'chatzar Beis HaMelech hapnim is that Esther stood in front of the chatzar of the Beis HaMelech. Amar Levi, Kivin shigei lebeis hatzlamim Achashverosh served idols, and as she was making her way to Achashverosh without being called, she walked through the church. At that moment, the stal came in Shechina. The Shechina departed from her, and that's the pasuk in Tehillim, where it says, Keli, Lama Zaftani. These were the Ayelas HaShachar. We had this not that long ago. That's Esther. She was the one that said, God, why did you abandon me? And in other words, you would answer, you go through a church, a Yid is never allowed to walk into a church. But again, she was not going there beratzain. She needed to go to Achashverosh. Even according to the Noidi Yehuda, she was saving all the Yidden. Shema Atadan al Shegek Kemezik. This the Mashas is referring to Asrach Avodah Zarah. But Allah Oines Keratzain doesn't make sense. Why should I lose my divine inspiration? Should then she chapped? Why? You know why? Because she was praising God already for the miracle that's about to happen. She is telling God, "Save me from the dog," which is in reference to Achashverosh. Being saved from a dog is a lesser miracle than being saved from a lion. She called him a dog because he was a dog, but she felt that she should have called him a lion, which would make the miracle greater. That's Oishema, maybe the reason why I feel the Ruach HaKodesh leaving me, because I called Achashverosh a Keleb. The Marsha writes another pshat that maybe Haman is the dog and Achashverosh is the lion, and she needed to pray for both because she thought only Haman was the anti-Semite and really was also him. As it says, Atzila mecherev nafshi. Hey, Mem Nun, I think that's the Marsha, is Haman. Miyat kerev yichidasi, from the hand, from the grip. Yichidasi means from the grip of a dog. So maybe because I'm minimizing the miracle, let's go with that shot. So Chazavik say, therefore she went and she called Achashverosh a lion. As she continued to daven, Hoshiyeni, save me from the mouth of a lion. Oh, Gewalt, Chevra, to be continued. I want to make a suggestion that tomorrow morning, if we can start 10 minutes early. If not, I don't see us. We'll start if everyone is okay.
Yeah.
If not, we'll be okay. We'll start at 10. With the help of God, to be continued. It's late. This is like the end of Soik of Rosh. It's big dafen. No, Rosh Chodesh we learn for 1 hour because we start davening early. Now we're going to go for an hour and 10 minutes.